Well done, Oscar. Well done. Checkered flag. Well done, buddy. Really good.
Yep. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. Thanks for the coordination. Sorry. I made the swap a little bit more painful than it needed to be, but thank you. Appreciate that. Well done. Maximum points. Really good weekend. First F1 win. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Oscar Piastri is a Formula One race winner. A typically muted celebration from the Australian as he became the 115th different winner in F1 history. And while his victory looked assured from the first corner, late drama very nearly cost him. To discuss all that, I'm joined by DNF1 podcast host Adam Burns and F1 YouTuber Lord VS. So let's get straight into it. So I've got the guys both here joining me now. Adam, how are you? How was the race for you? Like, how are you doing in life as well?
Yeah, life is pretty good. Quite restful at the moment. Just had a week away in Devon.
Nice.
Funny enough, we weren't too far away, actually. So small world.
Yeah, weird small world that we happened to be very close, and it wasn't at a racetrack.
Yeah.
But anyway.
And of course, I'm glad to be seeing the F1 cars going around again. But no, in answer to your first question, the more important stuff. Yeah, it was a pretty good race. I think F1's all of a sudden, now that the leaders are all bunching up and we've actually got fights on our hand, I can honestly say it's been a while since we've had a boring race that we're struggling to find content for.
I mean, yeah, isn't that a nice thing? I mean, this time last year, we were not in that situation. Obviously, a seventh in a different winner. We'll get on to who it is. I'm sure you're probably aware by now. If you're not, which rock have you been living under? And also, I'm sure at the start of the podcast, you've heard it, but if you haven't, it's coming up. Lawrence, how are you doing? How was the race for you?
It was fine for the first 45 laps. It was great. Mm-hmm. I had to contain myself. I had my kid who hadn't napped all day, 4 months old, bless them. Just they were napping, so I really had to be quiet at turn one when Oscar gets the lead, and I'm like, hey, gotta be quiet. But either way, my emotions were having to be kept in check. But those last 20 laps were just painful to watch. I'm thinking, oh, Lando, don't you do that. Don't, you're not prepared for the backlash. Get ready for the booze. But fortunately, that Lando saw sense. But yeah, the race was good. And as you say, this is getting interesting because now Max has had his championship lead cut, and by a meaningful amount. And this time, Red Bull didn't score as many points, not just because of Checo's maladies on Saturday. So yes, Checo wasn't fully to blame.
Yeah, that still happened. Of course it did. We'll get on to Red Bull in a minute. But I think, first of all, let's hear a little clip of Oscar's, sort of what his reaction was to his first win in F1.
Very, very special. A lot of Australian flags, actually, which was very cool to see. It was an incredible moment. I mean, it's always special when you get to stand on an F1 podium, but it's a little bit nicer when you're at the top of it. So very happy. Like I said, an incredible moment that I've been dreaming of for a very long time. I said my first dream in my career was reaching F1. The second one is winning a race. I'm very, very happy and proud, and not just of myself, but everybody that's helped me get to this position. Going back to my family, firstly, of course, took a lot of big decisions at a young age to chase the F1 dream. It's very difficult to become an F1 driver by staying in Australia, so it meant some big decisions early in life, and just very, very proud that those decisions have paid off, and we've managed to make it worth it. Of course, myself, just incredibly happy to have achieved this moment.
So as you can tell, it was probably very muted celebration from Oscar. I mean, was anyone expecting anything different? He's not the kind of guy to be shouting off the rooftops as he was. It was like it was his 100th win, not his first one. But we'll get onto it. I mean, I think I said to these guys before we started, I think it's going to be nice if we focus on Oscar a bit first. I mean, I'm sure everyone's going to focus on the strategy, but let's talk about Oscar. Let's talk about his career so far, because I think everyone sort of thought this win was a matter of when, not if, but it has now happened. And he's still only a season and a half into his F1 career. Adam, what does this win mean for Oscar overall? We'll get into the finer details, but so far, like his career trajectory and where he can sort of go now from it.
Well, don't be fooled by the radio messages that followed after the race. I think it's probably the best way to put it, because I'm sure for those of you who haven't followed Oscar Piastri's career and know what he's about and how methodical he is and how very businesslike he is, and not to get too caught up in the moment and think about the bigger picture, that kind of character, it's very easy if you didn't know all of that to think, oh, this is a little bit mild-mannered. I've never heard less excitement from a radio message following your first ever win. I mean, it wasn't too long ago that Lando Norris had his first win in Miami, and the guy was literally in floods of tears. He was emotional. It was an incredible moment. All of those things were still true with Oscar Piastri. And even if we didn't hear it on the radio message, I'm 100% certain that Oscar would be absolutely beaming. I'm sure he's celebrating like crazy right now. I think we saw his mum on social media saying she cancelled her Pilates class back in Australia to celebrate. So, yeah, the emotions are running high, I'm sure, within the Piastri clan. And, yeah, I think for his career, Sam, I think it's just a culmination of all the hard work and the talent and the sacrifice that all the other 114 drivers that won a Formula One race before him have done. And it's just a wonderful moment for Oscar Piastri. I think when we look back on this, following the aftermath of obviously how it all went down, there will be plenty of room to celebrate and look upon this moment as a moment where Oscar Piastri finally announced himself onto the Formula One scene amongst the big hitters, as his performances so far have shown.
And like, so it was an interesting point that Adam makes there, sort of the comparison to Lando in Miami. And I wanted to talk about that. For Lando, it was such a huge weight off his shoulders, wasn't he? Obviously, he had that. He admitted he'd heard the nickname Lando No Wins. It was something he was thought about. It'd been a good number of races about that win. Whereas Oscar, coming obviously only a season and a half into his career, it just very much didn't seem like it was that much of a weight off his shoulders. It seemed like he thought, oh, this was going to happen. He did mention a bit that it was his sort of second dream after getting into F1 is to win a race. But what do you think this would do for him, like his mentality? Because I think we can all agree that Lando, since he's won, has been a bit of a different driver. He seemed a lot more confident. He seemed a lot more willing to maybe go that extra mile and just overall a better racer. Like, where does Oscar go from, and what does this win do for him?
I feel like what this race's win has done has solidified the decision on McLaren to actually hire him, and that it's an ultimate insurance policy. Say, for example, if Lando Norris were to ever go somewhere else, it means they would have a great leader in Oscar, as in they would have that stability, and they've got somebody who is basically unflappable. This race was like, it was won at turn one, quite frankly, because there was a move that not many people really picked up on, in that Lando basically was pushing Oscar toward the wall, hoping that he would back off, but Oscar was not phased. And this is the point. And he did his trademark. This is what Oscar does. And I've noticed this. He did it at Silverstone last year. He did it at Spa against Carlos. Didn't quite work then, but he tried it. And he goes in deep onto the inside. Like, he tucks himself into the inside as best as he can. And then he pulls off these moves. And it's like, where did he come from? And people were just not really realizing it. But the point is, though, is that this is just the culmination of all the frustration that McLaren and he have had. The Piastri side of the garage has seen a lot of frustration. Like Imola, that could have been pole, or at least the front row, had McLaren communicated properly about Magnussen and that impeding penalty. There was Monaco. Had he been able to get Charles into turn one, he might have had it, or he was just that little bit quicker in pole. Then there was Austria, the track limits thing. And I just feel like basically that he and the team are one, and that Tom Stollard is the perfect engineer. They've built a strong relationship, and they've got that connection, and they trust one another, and they've got that dynamic. And now that both drivers have won a Grand Prix, and this year, it's given McLaren the confidence in which to go forward. And we probably will talk about it later. There are still some operational issues that they need to improve upon, but it's a step up from what they did in Silverstone, in that their strategies did work out, in terms of the basic plans. And with Oscar, he's just cemented himself in. It's just a shame that Zach wasn't here to celebrate. Yeah, he was busy off in Toronto and IndyCar.
Yeah, he's spending his time with it. I mean, I don't know if you two know this, but Tom Stallard, former Olympian. I had absolutely no idea he was an Olympian before he joined McLaren. So yeah, he's obviously someone who knows what it is to be a sports person.
Yeah.
Adam, I mean, it's a hard question, isn't it? But when we're talking about Piastri's potential, and it's actually something I asked Mark Webber recently, he said he hated the word potential. But I'm going to do it anyway. Where can Oscar go? I mean, what's his limit? I mean, obviously, it's a very competitive field. You've got a lot of young guys. And I think even though we think of Oscar as the really young guy, he's not that much younger than Lando. Lando started a lot earlier, so he's more of a veteran. What is Oscar's future? Is he a world champion in the making? Has he got more race wins? Like, what would you predict we see from him?
Oh, it's so hard when you put a driver in the same era as Max Verstappen at the moment, and how much he's been successful over the last few years and probably will continue to do so for as long as Red Bull give him the car to do that. I think it's fair to say that Oscar Piastri, the way he's going and the trajectory he's currently on and the rate that he is improving all the time. I remember it wasn't long ago you were asking me, is Oscar Piastri under-delivering, or is it fair to say that he's not performing to his potential? I know, there's that word again. I think the sky's the limit for Oscar, in the same way that it is for Lando in terms of what they can achieve. But I think those two are very contrasting in how I perceive they will go about it, where you've got Lando Norris, obviously, he's a very emotive driver. He has that X factor, that pure speed, that's, that special talent that perhaps only a few drivers in a generation can have, and everyone waxes lyrical about that. But there are obviously some weaknesses in Lando's game that perhaps Oscar, on the other side of it, excels at. Oscar, unflappable. I think the word you used earlier, Lawrence, that is definitely a word I would use to describe Oscar. Very consistent, always learning, always growing. And he may not have that X factor yet, but I think he's got all the ingredients that you need to be a solid, consistent race winner. And in the right circumstances, definitely a difficult challenger for a world championship. So I see no reason why Oscar can't be considered in that same breath. I mean, it may be a little bit premature, but now he's got that first win. Let's see if that inspires more confidence and unlocks the next level that we've seen in Lando Norris following Miami.
I mean, that'd be one to watch. And I think one trait, I mean, you make a good point, he doesn't have an obvious weakness. I think one thing he struggled with last year was really keeping tyres alive. And I think if you want proof that he's managed to sort that this year, just look at Hungary. Hungary is a track that eats tyres. I mean, it's really hot. We saw much more experienced drivers really struggling. And of course, Piastri had no issue with it. He kept the lead. He had such a huge gap early on. And it was... really good showing that he's managed to sort of get that skill and make it a bit more his strength rather than his weakness.
Yeah, no, last year, this was the track last year which really brought people's attention to the tyre management issues of Oscar, because he got that floor damage when Perez, I think, ran him wide or something like that. So that was when people were starting, well, hang on a minute, he's got issues with his tyres, and that's why he fell off. Because I think at one point he was like heading for a podium, and he just fell back down to a distant fifth. And I think what people, I think this is quite crucial, and this is why I think Oscar could be an ultimate rival to Max, is that Lando is very much being like an Ayrton Senna in terms of inspiration, as is Max. 2 Sennas into a corner, you get catastrophe. You need a Prost. And I feel like Oscar is an Alain Prost. And he even says in interviews that he likens his smooth driving style and calculated thinking towards Alain Prost. And now that Alain Prost has been cast aside by the Renault group, who's to say that he could become a special advisor back at McLaren? But I just feel like that's the kind of guy you need to go up against a world champion like Max and to challenge. This is the beginning, because he handled those tyres. Ted Kravitz, he was saying that tyre management for Oscar was perfect. And I was like leaning forward going, perfect, you say? Perfect, you say? After all of the people, everyone goes, oh, if only he was good on his tyres. No, according to Ted, it's perfect. Excellent.
I mean, Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, firstly, I hadn't thought that Prost comparison, but that is a great comparison, and we might have another Prost center on our hands over the next few years. A few stats about it. So, Piastri, 115th different F1 winner, 5th Australian winner. I'm going to give you two a very quick quiz. I hadn't thought about this, but who are the other 4 Australian winners? I mean, it's quite easy.
Oh,
Well, you got Mark Webber,
Yep.
Daniel Ricciardo,
Yep.
Alan Jones, and
Yeah.
Jack Brabham. It would be.
There you go. Very good.
Sorry,
very
Lawrence.
good.
I know you helped me with the Jack Brabham one, although I'm sure that would have come to me
no,
eventually.
no, you got it. We got it.
You got that?
Yeah.
Very good. He's also, this can be depressingly, he's the first winner born in the 2000s.
Oh, yeah,
that
in
is,
the 21st century.
Yeah, he's the first 21st century winner. Paul Hamilton, who was sharing the podium with those two, looking over like, my God, I started when you were in your nappies, it was what he actually said. Let's take a short break, and then we'll come back. We're going to talk about all that strategy goodness and get into the race properly. So we're back. Let's run through the race. I'll give you the story of the race. As we've all mentioned, not a great start from Lando to begin with. He doesn't get off the line poorly, but Oscar has a much better start. And Max behind in P3 has a very good start as well. An odd move, I thought. We can discuss it a little bit more. But Lando comes off to cover Oscar, but in doing so, massively leaves himself vulnerable to Max behind. And as Lawrence mentioned, Oscar pretty much keeps his shoulders out, doesn't let Lando get the easy inside line. And what that results in is a free car sandwich going into the first corner. Max goes wide, keeps P2, and it's actually lap 4 when he gives the place back. I mean, we can discuss that as well. Let's discuss the start then. Let's before we get into the strategy stuff. That move from Lando, Adam, moving across to stop Piastri rather than perhaps like blocking off Verstappen behind him. Do you think that was the right move, or do you think he should have thought, okay, that's my teammate, we can maybe do some strategy later on. I've got Max, who's a guy who's not going to give an inch, is he, if I let him. Like, what did you make of Lando's start?
It's an interesting one because I think if you're Lando Norris, you might have looked over and thought, well, maybe Max is perceived as the bigger threat. But I think judging by the fact that he tries to cover Oscar off probably suggests that he felt his teammate was the bigger threat to the victory today. And I think with retrospect, he was proven right in that regard. So, no, I'm not surprised that Lando made that move. I think, as Lawrence alluded to earlier, that McLaren fans and surely everybody that works at McLaren would have been wincing and oohing and ahhing, hoping that the two didn't collect each other and give Max Verstappen an opportunity for an easy win today. Fortunately, that didn't happen. So, no, I'm not surprised by the move from Lando. Fortunately, they all kept it clean. 2 of them kept it on the road. I don't think there was any perceivable way Max would have been able to keep it on the road, but they all carried on. No harm done. So I think they can just put that one down to as a relative success, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Lawrence, if he doesn't make that move and try and stop Piastri going across, do you think he holds on to the lead, or do you think his start was so not... I keep saying bad. It wasn't bad. We've seen bad starts from Lando. It wasn't a great start, but it wasn't a bad one. Do you think if he just stayed on his line and maybe didn't try and come across so much, he probably may have led into turn 1?
Oh, it probably would have... Maybe. I think it potentially, if he just carried on straight and just tried to get the traction down to turn 1 to get like a wide-ish line, I feel like if he'd have been allowed to do that, then I think Oscar probably would have still gotten it anyway, because he was like that, as I mentioned earlier, that seems to be Oscar's style. If he has the inside line, he'll go as tight to turn 1 as possible if it's a clockwise corner. Yeah, as in it's a clockwise circuit. But I think probably what it might have done is that it might have allowed him to stay ahead of Verstappen throughout, because he would have been probably keeping Max wide, because they'd be obviously keeping an eye on each other after what's been happening in the last few races to try and suss each other out. We wouldn't have had that situation where Max would have been... Well, I mean, I think there's a shot I saw on social media where it's like the 3 cars together in the middle of turn 1 going into turn 2. And it's just like they concertina, which pushes Max out. He takes the line back. And then, as we see, it's he then holds on to the position for about a couple of laps and then allows Oscar to get that 3-second gap.
Yeah, you're right. That is a crucial bit of the race, isn't it? Like, Max doesn't give the position back to lap 4. There's a bit of toing and throwing on the radio. So Lando's obviously complaining, so he went off the track. The stewards in their typically quick fashion says we're gonna investigate it about a lap and a half, perhaps too late. Eventually, GP tells Max to give up the position, but you're right. By that point, Oscar's got a healthy lead. I mean, are we both in agreement that Max should have given the position back? Is there any objection to that?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think when you look at the replay and you look at Max on entry point, which is where his argument is that obviously he was slightly ahead of Lando at the corner, the apex is so far to the right-hand side that it's really hard to judge that position. So I think even though you could argue Max might have been slightly ahead of Lando at that point, he's going off the road anyway. You're always going to run that risk when you're that wide, especially 3 wide at turn 1 on lap 1 at Hungary. You're always going to run that risk. And by the time he rejoins the circuit, okay, he rejoins it in a safe manner, but he has gained an advantage. Even if he was slightly ahead, he was a full car length ahead of Lando by the time he rejoins the track. So I think it's a fair call from Giampiero to just say to Max, look, give up the place because we might get done for this later on. And yeah, all it really did was give Oscar that buffer he needed to stay ahead and pull away.
Yeah, you're right. It very much confirmed. I mean, the stewards always put out documents about their decisions, and they pretty much said that if they hadn't given the place back, Max would have got a penalty. And I think it's a 10-second penalty, 5-second penalty. It's quite a severe penalty for if you don't hand it back. So yeah, right move by them. And then we have sort of a little bit of a quiet period in the race. So like obviously the top 3 just staying as it is. Piastri doing really well to maintain his lead. And then I think the first round of pit stops sort of come with that incident. So Lando pits in lap 18, a 2.8 second stop. And I think that's about par for what we saw in Hungary. I think the high temperatures may have played an impact on that because it wasn't super, super quick stops. He comes up 5th behind the Ferraris, behind Max, and behind Oscar as well. Oscar then pits a lap later, 2.5 second stop, into 4th behind the 3 who haven't pitted, obviously, both the Ferraris, and Max, who eventually pit and sort of the order's re-established. And then we get to the second round of pit stops. This is where it sort of gets very interesting. So it all kicks off, lap 41. So Hamilton in P3 pits. And I think that sends the shivers up McLaren's spine. They sort of get worried about the undercut, which has proved very strong at this circuit, at this year, throughout the race, as it is so far. So in order to do that, McLaren very much go away from the usual convention. So how it usually works is sort of you give your lead driver the best option of continuing to be in the lead. Whereas this time, obviously, Lando in P2 was given the better pit stop, so he pits into lap 46. And then Oscar pits a few laps later, comes out behind Lando, but does it on the assumption that he's going to get the place back. I mean, he's been told by Tom Stullard, who we've mentioned, that you're going to get the place back, don't worry. You've got Will Joseph, who's Lando's engineer, saying you need to give the place back. And what we saw was just a fascinating exchange over the next 20 laps of like how Will Joseph in particular was trying to get Lando to do what he's been told, really. Like we went from firm to you used to do this to starting to say you're destroying your tires to sort of being very personal towards the end. It was sort of my takeaway that they mentioned about every Sunday morning meeting that they have before the race. So that's clearly, I mean, we don't know, we're not in the room, but you think that stuff about teamwork, about how they're going to win a race. He was getting increasingly frustrated, Will Joseph, and we were sort of thinking, is Lando ever going to give this place back? I mean, I personally thought he wasn't ever going to do it. I thought it was going to be like a Max Sao Paulo situation with Checo a few years ago. But eventually, 2 laps to go, Lando does give the spot back. Piastri goes on to win the race. But before we get into the analysis, let's hear those crucial radio messages.
Okay, Oscar. So once you get to Lando, we will swap position. But we want to avoid Lando having to give up a lot of race time.
We need you to save more tyres, please, and we do want to let Oscar through.
We should have boxed him first then, surely, no?
Doesn't matter.
I mean, it does. For me, maybe.
And Lando, we still think you're using the tyres too much. Turn 4, turn 11, and the rear's exit. Turn 6, turn 9. Oscar's 3.5. I know you'll do the right thing. Okay, Lando, 10 laps to go. We think both cars are using their tyres too much. Just remember every single Sunday morning meeting we have.
Yeah, tell him to catch up then, please.
Lando, he can't catch you up. You've proved your point, and it really doesn't matter.
He's on much bigger tyres, no pressure, he's still. I mean, I would have tried to undercut anyway. If I didn't, I would have gone the ball.
Mate, we did the stop sequence in this order for the good of the team.
Yeah, I'm fighting for a championship.
Okay, I'm trying to protect you, mate. I promise, I'm trying to protect you. And Lando, there are 5 laps to go. The way to win a championship is not by yourself, it's with the team. You're going to need Oscar, and you're going to need the team.
We'll leave this to risk gets.
Understood, Oscar. We're managing it.
So if there's a safety car now, it's going to make this very awkward. Please do it now.
Yeah, you don't need to say anything.
But let's dissect that whole strategy thing, because it was something that's left a bit of a sour taste in the mouth, even after Piastri got his maiden win. Like, Lawrence, what did you make of the whole affair, really, from start to finish?
Well, watching the post-race interviews, it was clear that actually Will Joseph was being fed lines from Andrea Stella himself, as in he was basically. It was almost like, Will's like kind of like trying to get an anger, and then Andrea's like, "Tell him about the meetings. Tell him it will destroy the team." But I'm like, Andrea, where are you on the radio? You had a button.
I was going to say that's
it
fascinating.
should have been
comparison.
like, because you get Toto going like,
yeah.
You can win this, George. And it says, Luis, just ride the car. If you get the moment when the team principal intervenes and goes like, do it, that's when you go, oh, okay. Yeah, this is like, Lando would know that he messed up or that it was getting ridiculous. So I wasn't quite sure about the softly approach, because it was like, it was just getting painful. But it just felt like Lando was given every opportunity to get past Oscar with having the undercuts and all that stuff. And I feel like the situation might not have been so bad had, whilst lapping Ocon, Oscar simply went wide. He went wide. He lost like 4 seconds. And even though he was able to claw that back to like 2 seconds before the second stint stops, it seriously impacted his race. As in, the commentators were saying, oh, well, it would have given him a little bit more wiggle room in terms of an undercut. Like if he was undercut, he'd have some breathing space. But I just felt like you can tell that Oscar would have been probably a bit suspicious if Lando pitted first. So Tom was on the radio quickly. Don't worry, Oscar. Don't worry. This isn't an undercut. We're just doing this right now. Lando needed his tire change. He'll give the place back. And we didn't hear Oscar getting desperate or angry or anything like that. And I think McLaren are really, really grateful for that. That Oscar wasn't going, why is he giving the place back? He was only, I think, at one point saying, this is starting to get a little bit risky. Ooh.
That was his.
That's the most daring it got. It was just like, oh, be careful, mate.
His most stressed message was like, it's going to be harder the later he does, which for Piastri is like him essentially saying, tell him to move out the way. Adam, was there a moment in your mind? I don't know about you. Like when you're watching that, are you thinking that Norris is going to give the place back, or because I think everyone watching was like, well, that's it, over, as Piastri's lost his chance.
Honestly, I didn't think Lando was going to do it. And I think if it wasn't for that radio call, was it Tom Stallard saying to Lando at the end?
Will Joseph.
Will Joseph, sorry. Yeah. I always get the two confused. But yeah, it was Will on that radio call, and he said to Lando, we have to think about the potential of a virtual safety car, because of course, he's right. If that was called so late in the race, they can't swap places around. They wouldn't be allowed to do it. Unless they do some sort of stupid rubbish on like they do on F1 24, where you just go off the road and you can overtake someone on your PlayStation, whatever. Wouldn't be able to do that in real life, I'd imagine. But, it's, worth a shot. But no, at that point, I was almost a little surprised Lando did it in the end. And I think perhaps it just set off in his mind, actually, we've got to think about the long game here. We are now in a position where we have the fastest car on the grid. Both of us are up there. It's not just the constructors. Maybe he needs to think about the Drivers' Championship. If there is any remote possibility that he could claw Max back, we can't rule anything out at this point in time. We've still got half a season to go, so who knows? But yeah, I was a little bit surprised to see it all happen. I was worried about getting another multi-21 situation, or what would it be, 481 or whatever it would be. And Webber being Piastri's manager as well, that would have been quite interesting to get his take on it. But I do, if I may, just want to sort of kind of lean on a point Lawrence made earlier, which is quite important in all of this, and why I think Lando probably felt a little bit hard done by that he had to make to follow that instruction in the end. In that Oscar making that mistake, losing 3 or 4 seconds, kind of put McLaren in a bit of a quandary, really, because by losing that time and reacting to Hamilton's early pits, obviously Leclerc as well pitted with him, McLaren obviously felt a little bit conservative and wanted to protect both their drivers from the threat of that undercut, because the undercut, as we saw in this race, was quite powerful. So they may have originally thought, we'll have a buffer, we'll be able to pit Lando to cover off Lewis and Leclerc or even Max, we can then pit Oscar a lap later. But because of that mistake Oscar made, you ended up in that position where you had to almost protect Lando, and they thought, well, we can't pit Oscar straight away the next lap because they may come out side by side and might fight each other, and that risks a collision into turn one, and then they've lost the race. So they wait an additional lap after that, which then puts Oscar behind, and then they've got to try and rearrange the cars around. I think the instruction was, we want to re-establish the order at your convenience. It's not quite Fernando is faster than you, but, we'll take it at this point. So it was a culmination of a few things, not necessarily going the way McLaren would have wanted them to, all starting from Oscar losing that critical buffer he had earlier on in the middle stint. So in answer to your earlier question, it does take a little bit of a light off this win, and I think we saw following Oscar Piastri's reaction that perhaps he felt like, even though he had won the race, his thunder was stolen a little bit from that moment. It wasn't a case of, without doubt, he would have definitely won. There is an argument to be made that Lando might have been able to catch him on raw pace, because we saw in that last stint Lando was flying. So a lot of questions up in the air. I think the right outcome happened for McLaren. I think they'll be able to circumnavigate this between the two drivers, and it should be fine going forward. But that certainly made for some interesting television, and it was quite nervy for a moment. I thought Lando might end up doing a Vettel after all of this and just take the win for himself. And I don't think you would begrudge him too much for doing it, given the circumstances.
Let's hear what he had to say after the race.
I didn't give up the race win. I lost the race win off the line. So I know everyone's going to want to say that as a story that I gave up the race win. I didn't. I boxed first. Naturally, you're always going to undercut. So the team gave me this position and I gave it back. Nothing more than that. You got to be selfish in this sport at times, and you got to think of yourself. That's priority number one, is think of yourself. And I'm also a team player, so my mind was going pretty crazy at the time. And I know what we've done in the past between Oscar and myself, and he's helped me plenty of times. And I think this is a different situation. This is not someone helping one another. This is I was put into a position and we were undoing that position change. But I'm also, and I get it, and I know a lot of people are going to say, like, the gap between me and Max is pretty big, 60, 70, 80 points or something. But, if Red Bull and Max make the mistakes like they did today and continue to do that, and as a team we continue to improve and have weekends like we've had this weekend, we can turn it around. And it's still optimistic. It's still a big goal to say, we can close 70 points. And as a driver, I can close 70 points in half a season. And then when you're thinking of the 7 or 6 points that I give away, then it crosses your mind for sure. So it was not easy, but I also understood the situation I was in, and I was quite confident always by the last lap I would have done it. I think that I was put in this situation, and it's not my fault. I was leading the race in a way. Simply, the team should have just boxed Oscar first, and we wouldn't even be having this discussion.
So as you heard, Norris sort of on the defensive, sort of not pushing the button very much. He very much said he agreed with the team decision, and I think key to that was he said it was his start. It wasn't his race to win, was it? He very much ruined the start, as we've already mentioned. Let's talk about the future then, sort of where this goes, because obviously every time something happens, it doesn't happen in isolation. You expect to have some kind of consequence. And we've seen with Piastri, since he's arrived at McLaren, he's been happy to sort of play the team game. He's especially in Australia earlier this year, he got out of the way for Lando much earlier than Lando did this time. Does that change, Lawrence? Does that dynamic change now that this has happened, and also that Oscar's now a race winner as well? Or do you think both drivers are going to be sat down and say, look, this is a team game. We need you to both be performing for each other rather than just yourselves?
I'm just thinking that Lando's very lucky that Zach was not there that weekend, because I think they would have banged their heads together and say, what the heck do you think you were doing? But he's not there. So I think Lando was feeling a bit frisky. But in all seriousness, I feel like going forward, what this means is that Oscar has now solidified his place as a team player, no question. As in, like, he kept his cool. He was very... On the radio, he was sort of blaming himself, like saying, Sorry if me not catching up made things worse. And I'm thinking, dude, calm down. Don't blame yourself for this. But it's also thrown a kernel of doubt, a seed of doubt in the minds of McLaren that Lando might pull that stunt again. Because he was, admittedly, Lando had a point in that, yeah, if you were going to do that strategy with Oscar, why didn't you pit him first? As in, like, he answered a fair point. But it was just like the silence. I mean, was it just like, I think they were starting to get like, he was trying to remind them that he could have won if he wanted. It was just like, no, what Lando did in him being defiant in trying to prove that he could have won the race is just taken the shine off of McLaren's first 1-2 in over a decade. And it's hollow. And as a McLaren fan, as a Piastri fan, I'm like, why you got to do that? It just ruined the experience. This should have been a joyous occasion. No. There was a 1-2, Daniel Ricciardo, Norris in 2021. My apologies. But at
first one on merit, I'd say. Obviously, there was things that happened
without any shenanigans when it comes to title deciding crashes at turn 1, or technically turn 2. But
well, they did it again. So
Hamilton and Verstappen did hit
maybe we need to find a way to manufacture those two coming together all the time, just so we get the McLaren 1-2.
Yeah,
I think if that was the case, then McLaren would have won the 2021 World Championship. In
reality, though, there's going to have to be some real serious discussions about this to make sure this doesn't happen again, especially with Spa, another Piastri track where he's really good at. Like he was there fighting Max in the sprint race. He probably would have done really well had he not gone into contact with Carlos at the beginning of the race. And I just feel like they really need to make it very clear that the original policy still stands. McLaren is team first. It always has been in this modern era. In this Zach Brown era, that it is team first, we make the call. You can say your piece, and all, but ultimately we make the final decision. And that might be seemingly too nice, and it's compromising the idea of people going for the title. But right now, Max is still well over 70 points ahead, and he still took out a decent chunk of points. And in the constructors, I mean, McLaren's only like just over 50 points behind, and that can easily be whittled down even more before we go to the summer break. So I think right now the focus is on the team title, and if there's an opportunity, and if that's the sense, then a championship bid will come. But this is frankly this year a dress rehearsal for 2025. This is everyone's trying to find their feet. Max is rattled. He is extremely rattled. I mean, I was just watching a thing from Planet F1, an article about what Max says to his critics about being disrespectful and how he can just tell them to foxtrot Oscar. And I'm like, oh, okay. This is okay. This is for people thinking F1's boring. It ain't no more.
Yeah, you're very right. I mean, let's go back to McLaren a bit soft. I mean, I literally Googled what the exact terminology was to get this right. They said to Norris, we'd like to re-establish the order at your convenience. And it was interesting. Nico Rosberg picked this up when Stella was on Sky. He said, do not tell a racing driver that. Like, that is so open. That is so leaving the door to interpretation. And obviously Rosberg knows quite well about teammate battles through his time at Mercedes. And he said, you've really got to be strict. I mean, Adam, F1 drivers are selfish, aren't they? Inherently selfish. That's sort of how they get into this position. Do you think most of the fault lies with McLaren for putting the drivers in that position where Norris essentially had to choose which one of them were going to win?
Oh, absolutely. Just the point I was talking about earlier about how McLaren found themselves in this situation, it was mostly of their own doing. They could have pit Oscar first, and I'm sure Lando would have had the pace even if he ended up behind Hamilton to overcome that and re-overtake him. I don't think many people would have doubted that. So yeah, I think McLaren have to be very careful, and I think Nico Rosberg, as you rightly pointed out, hit the nail on the head. You can't say to a driver, let your teammate through at your own convenience. Because Lando could easily say, well, it wasn't convenient for me, so I took the win, or tries to prove the ultimate point and do a Barrichello and lead the whole way through and then just crawl to the line just to wait for Oscar to re-overtake, just to say, yeah, could have won that, but I decided to do a Lightning McQueen and let the other guy through, just to prove a point. So they are treading on that tightrope in terms of managing this relationship in the way they would want to. They do have to be more assertive in those situations. I think they left it way too open-ended and created this huge issue that has created a bit of a shadow over what should be an incredible celebration of what is McLaren's best day on merit for a very long time in Formula One. Fortunately for them, Lando, whether through sheer will or whether this was the plan or whether he was convinced, ultimately obeyed the order. That's the good thing. So they can have a dress down with this, talk to Lando, talk to Oscar, hash it all out and deal with it in the right way, knowing that Oscar's not going to resent Lando for taking a win from him that he deserved. So they've got that part that they can enjoy. Going forward, they have to make sure that they don't end up in that situation again. And if they do find themselves in that scenario, they have to be firm, they have to be strict, and they have to be consistent to both guys. Otherwise, this incredible position that they've worked so hard to get to could be over just like that at their own doing.
Absolutely.
Look, Lawrence, how do they fix these team issues? Because it's something we've been talking about a lot. It's something that Lando's commented on. It's something that Andrea Stella's commented on. We're thinking about Silverstone, their decision not to pit when they did. There's been a lot of very small margins. As we said, once you get to the higher end of F1, those small differences make a huge difference overall. Like, yeah, to win a race is very hard. When it comes to these small little team things, is that something you can improve on away from the track? Is that something that's just on an experience of being in the race? Because they've got people there, like Randy Singh has got a huge amount of experience, their sporting director, yet there's something about the team currently that's just lacking that little bit of, whatever you call it, that little final percent. Like, how do they fix that?
I feel like this is still a hangover from the period where the results are starting to come after the dark ages of 2015 through 18, when there's a chance for a podium and McLaren just lock down and go, everybody stay calm, everyone stay calm, do not make any risks, do not take any risks. As in, like, you know, they lock down, they don't gamble, they consolidate what they have. That's the thing. Consolidation with McLaren is really rampant, and it's still a legacy product from when a podium might not have been a guarantee, or it might not have come around every once in a while. But we have to understand that podiums are now to be expected. So you need to have that little extra step. It can be done. And I'm pretty sure that over the winter, we will have McLaren pilfering potential candidates and personnel that could be good for strategists. I don't know whether or not it might lead to a different race engineer for both of them, because it seems to work for both of them, or they might need to change their approach. But I wouldn't be surprised if there are some personnel changes going into 2025, or they have to think about bolder strategies, because, to put simply, they did not train up enough in the double stack in Silverstone, and that's what lost them on a 1-2 there, which we could have had a double 1-2. And it would have been like that. It would have been poetic. Norris and Piastri in the British Grand Prix, Piastri Norris at Hungary. And it would have been, people would have been celebrating that to no end. McLaren would be probably within under 30 points in the constructors to Red Bull. It would be game on. And there'd be opportunity to really snap at their heels before the summer break. And the momentum would have been solely McLaren's. But right now, what they've got themselves is a storm. It's a storm brewing, as in, like, they somehow got a 1-2, and yet people still don't like them. And it's like, how do you do that? You get the results you want, but you get this PR disaster still. And it could have been worse, absolutely. And I'm sure that Norris and Piastri, they don't resent each other. They were patting each other on the back. I think they do. If there was anyone to blame, they would realize that it's the team for being for dithering and just not quite getting it right, and just being too softly. They need, as you say, Sam and Adam, they need to toughen up. They need to be right up there and make rash calls that may upset a driver over at the benefit of another driver. But right now, they've just made both drivers sort of going like shifty eyes at each other. Like, is Lando going to do that again? Is Oscar going to jump me at the start again? Like, there's going to be that tiny little bit of suspicion. And especially, Oscar is good at starts, and Lando is not. So if there is a front row thing, Oscar, more often than not, will get the advantage.
Adam, why is Lando so bad at starts? I mean, I can't remember this being something that we spoke a lot about with Lando, but it seems this year in particular, he's had some very poor starts. Is it a case of, similar to what we were saying about the team, where these things are being magnified because he's near the front? Is it the fact that he's now he's not competing against the likes of Gasly and Ocon. He's competing against Verstappen and Hamilton and all that lot, who are obviously very good at all aspects of driving. How does he fix that sort of? Is that just a practice thing, or can you fix that in the simulator? Like, what do you make of Lando's starts?
Well, I mean, if I knew the definitive answer to that, Sam, I'd probably be earning a lot of money as Lando's driver coach.
Very true.
But I think if I can offer some solace to Lando Norris, because this is a very important and relevant point, now that he's starting on the front row or pole positioning more often than not now, it is something he does need to address. Historically, some of the all-time greats are not the best starters. Ayrton Senna was famously not a great starter. Michael Schumacher was famously not a great starter. We used to see races, Michael in his prime used to literally turn almost as if he was arrowed towards the guy in second place.
Chop.
Exactly. The Schumacher chop, made famous for the fact that Michael was historically bad at starts. So I think for Lando, it's just a case of just something to keep practicing and work on. And I'm sure he'll be able to figure it out. We can't put it down to the car because Oscar is a very good starter. So, that would normally be the first thing I'd look at saying, oh, is it just the car that's not great accelerating off the line? Well, no, because the guy in the other car, the same car as you, is able to figure it out. So I'm sure practice will probably be the solution. They'll figure something out or be able to make an adjustment. I think Mercedes used to do this with Hamilton when he used to have bad starts. They were able to make an adjustment that he could use to sort that out. So, yeah, hopefully Lando can figure it out and get it sorted soon, because if he starts more races on pole position, as we expect him to do so in the short-term future, he's going to need to figure that out or do a Lando chop. I don't know, rebrand it if you like.
Perfect. Speaking of rebranding, another crucial thing. I mean, I'm going to play you this short clip of, you may have noticed something that was missing off the end of his podium, off his celebration that was very typical to Australians. Of course, that's your Shoey. This is what he had to say about it.
The Shoey Danny Ricks thing, I mean, I'm going to get roped into it because I'm an Aussie, but I don't know. I'll try and think of something new, but no, I think that's gone and done. I know we did one at Silverstone last week, but I think we were a bit upset after the race there, so we need just some cheering up. Maybe we'll do one in the plane on the way back, but no, I'll leave that to Danny Rick, and that could be his legacy. I'll create my own.
So yeah, no series for Oscar. I mean, that seems like a good place to end the second part. In the final part, we're going to come back. We're going to talk about the standing and sort of how that's changed everything and the gap to Red Bull. So we'll be back in a bit. So yeah, let's have a look at the standings. McLaren obviously taking maximum points, 43, compared to the 16 scored by Red Bull. I mean, it was not a good weekend for anyone in Red Bull colours. I mean, we could talk a little about Max, can't he? Like, I think this was probably Max's worst race in a good number of years. A very petulant Max came out. Lawrence, what did you make of Max and GP's back and forth? I mean, we spoke about Lando and Will Joseph, but Max and GP seem like a very much old married couple that are sick of the sight of each other.
I think this was a major revelation, well, just a fascinating revelation into their dynamic and relationship that we've not seen GP tested this far in a long time. Certainly, especially since team radio has become so widely available. And this is always the thing with team radio. And I think this has been something that George Russell's been the victim of, is that the world feed is picked by the producer for very spicy sound bites. So George isn't necessarily that whiny as has been portrayed by many people, thinking, oh, he complains too much. It's good telly. That's why. It's good telly. This was fantastic telly. Like, come on. I mean, this was just breaking down. I'm like, and Max was just breaking down. Like, he was just getting angry and whiny. And at that point when he was contesting, like, oh, he moved, Lewis was moving on to braking, and then GP was like, Max, I'm not even gonna bother. I'm not even gonna bother. This is childish. Stop. And I'm like, good on GP for being unflappable. It's like, he's the right guy for Max. Absolutely. He's the guy. Or as they would say, he's the one. He's the one. But the ultimate thing is that I've not seen Max get this stressed out, and GP going, I'm not fighting your corner, Max. This is no. That's not the point. And I was watching this with my wife, and even she's been following F1 since 2009, and she follows it with me too. She helps me out with my channel, and even she was getting like, oh dear, he's not happy. And he was getting really, really angry. And all the stuff in the media and the interviews, you are seeing blunt Max Verstappen. As in, like, I get that you're upset, and I get that you are cutthroat and ruthless, and it fits Red Bull's persona as being the bad boys of F1. But this is a little bit too far. But we got to remember that he's mad, and he made a big mistake. He's probably embarrassed by the fact that he made that error. And I will admit that the media, and especially the British commentators, were getting a little bit too heavy-handed when it came to the sim racing thing.
Oh, yeah.
They just did not stop. I mean, I get it. And there was, even when I think Anthony Davidson was like saying, well, to be fair, you know, he won in Imola when he was doing that. Yeah, but then Crofty said, well, he had a winning car back then. But I'm like, stop! You're making video games out to be bad. Sorry, bit of a mini rant there. But the point is, though, this is a dynamic that we will see more of, but I think GP is the right guy to be there, because otherwise, if you had someone else, it would have spilled out. But apparently Red Bull are going to be discussing this internally. So I think Max did overstep the mark, and I think he'll probably, I imagine, come media day for Spa, he'll be a bit more measured for about 20 minutes.
And I also happen to know the post-race briefing overran by about half an hour. Like, Christian Horner was supposed to speak and he was half an hour late because he was still in that briefing. I also agree with you about that point about the sim racing. When he was doing it and winning, everyone's like, oh, zany Max, isn't he doing well? Isn't he cool? And now he has a bad race. It's like, oh no, he shouldn't be doing this. And honestly, you think a multi-millionaire driver who's like tuned to the absolute professional degree is not getting enough sleep? That's madness. But anyway, I agree with you on that slight tangent off on there. Obviously not a great weekend for Perez as well. We're not going to touch that too much, but that also sort of leads into where we are in the standings. So McLaren, I mean, this seems like bizarre that it's taking this long, but McLaren up into P2 now, overtaking Ferrari. So the standings as they are is Red Bull 389, McLaren 338, Ferrari 322, and then a bit of a gap down to Mercedes 241. So that gap now between Red Bull and McLaren is just 51. I mean, Adam, the title race is on, isn't it? I mean, it's not a question of, is there a title race? I mean, it's on.
Oh, it's definitely on. I mean, if it wasn't on before, it's definitely on now. And, you know, Red Bull, for all of their strengths, have been rather fortunate in that the team a while ago that looked like they were really going to threaten them was Ferrari. And for whatever reason, they've started to fall away. I mean, we sort of know why that is and how difficult that's going to be to overcome. But as far as I'm concerned, Ferrari aren't in the mix right now. That's more historical where they are at the moment. They've got to worry more about Mercedes at this point in time. McLaren, on the other hand, are in a great position where they may now have the outright fastest car on the grid. And I think it's a fair argument to say they probably do. I don't know if it's been for as long as some people have made it out to be, but I think they certainly have it now. And for all of Max Verstappen's qualities, the one thing he cannot do is drive two cars. It's as simple as that. And, you know, maybe Red Bull will find a way to incorporate the sim rig into Max's car so he can drive Perez's car as well as his own. I don't know. I wouldn't put it past them. I'm sure the FIA wouldn't approve of that.
I want to see a sidecar. I want to see Perez in a sidecar, like an old bike.
You must have seen that meme doing the rounds of social
media. I saw that. It was photoshopped on. It was a sidecar.
Oh, amazing. I've got to find
brilliant. But it does present a real problem. You know, weekends like this one, people will say, oh, well, you know, Max didn't have a great weekend either, so it's even worse for Red Bull than normal. But Perez's performance today by beating George Russell when they were pretty much not too far away. Well, I mean, Perez was further down the order than George was and beat him in a straight fight. Great. But that's probably as good a performance Checo's done for a long time. I don't even know if it's all season. But so and only to finish, what was it, P7 in the end?
Yeah.
That's as good as it's been for him in a long, long time. And you can't afford to keep doing what he's been doing at the moment. I mean, the crash in Q1 just kind of left me thinking, what was it, that old meme from the McLaren Toon series, Alexander Arnold played the professor, or whatever he was, going, oh, this happened again. You know, that kind of thing. And all the talk about, will he be replaced in the summer break by Ricciardo or someone else or whatever? Red Bull need to find a solution, and they need to find it fast. They clearly don't have the fastest car right now on all tracks anymore, if at all. And McLaren, Oscar and Lando, you know, take everything away from what happened this weekend. They still finished first and second, and that's going to be a regular thing. And I think at this point, Sam, there's a fair argument to be made here that McLaren should possibly be leading the Constructors' Championship heading to the summer break. I don't think mathematically it's possible to do so yet before after Belgium. But I'll be very surprised the way things are going if McLaren do not win the Constructors' Championship. And I'm not saying that just because I'm here. I just think the way things are going right now, I'd put them as favourites at this point in time. I don't think there's too many arguments against that right now.
Yeah, before the season, I put a bet on them to be P2. And if you asked me that midway through the season, like, why isn't that going to come true? I would not have said it's because they're going to be P1. Any guesses on when Sergio Perez's last podium was? I mean, I've just looked it up and I was surprised myself. Does anyone remember when he was last in the top three?
I'm worried that it possibly is Baku last year when he won.
No, he's had
podium,
this
just
year.
podium.
He's had
Just podium.
Just podium, yeah.
Sorry, I didn't think you'd been on the podium after that.
I want to say it wasn't Australia. That was round 3. I want to say Suzuka.
One after. He was on the podium then, but the race after he was also on the podium for third.
Miami?
No, China was in between.
China.
Yeah. And think how long ago that was. That was in April.
That was round 5.
Yeah, so many races since. I was just looking at his record. It's 7th, 17th, 7th, 8th, retired, 8th. I mean, that is why McLaren are back in the title race. Let's move on to the drivers then. Obviously, a lot of great move up for Piastri. So he's up into, countdown, P5, I think.
Yeah, he was P5 after the Silverstone.
So
it's consolidated him to be within. He's now he's right on the heels of both Ferrari drivers.
And it's very tight in that. Like, we'll move on to Norris and Verstappen in a minute, but P3 downwards. So you've got Leclerc 162, Sainz 154, Piastri 149, and then a bit of a gap now to Hamilton 125, and Perez on 124. My God, I can't believe he's that low. Right, let's talk about Norris and Verstappen. We said the constructors' title is on. Is the driver's title on? I mean, there's still quite a big gap. So Verstappen on 265, Norris on 189. Lawrence, you're looking at me, you're sort of with a grimace, sort of a doubting grimace.
It's going to have to take a DNF. It's going to have to take a couple of DNFs to really bring it back into pace right now. But if we have more of these situations with Norris in contention for the win, Max having this whole thing with the car, the high downforce spec engine cover for Max is meant to be the magic bullet to suit him at the Hungaroring. It didn't work. And this is the thing. This is another misstep about, I think I tweeted this, is that I bet Max in the background's going, Adrian! As in, Adrian, all the revelations about various key points about the RB20, especially with cooling, were ignored by Pierre Vacher's team about what Adrian Newey said. So this is becoming apparent. And now Adrian, even though he's there at Red Bull at races, he's not working on the F1 car. He's staying out of all of that. He's there with Applied Technologies. But this is going to it's going to take more of these races where, Norris can chew out 8-point gaps, 10-point gaps, 12-point gaps. It's going to have to be whittled down. It's not going to be a situation where Max wins the championship with 6 races to spare. It's going to be maybe 3 or 4, which is still not. It's still dominant as in having races to spare, but it's not like a cakewalk. It's not going to be like last year where it was it was guaranteed within 6-7 races.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to have to require some mechanical issues or a crash. But given that Max is having to basically drive 101% by his own admission, we are going to see more and more mistakes come about where he has to overdrive the car. It's him basically having to get most of the points because of Checo's maladies, even though he was able to get back into the points and actually make Christian Horner out to say something true. Because he always say, oh, don't worry, Checo will bounce back next day. He didn't bounce back next day. What the hell?
Next race.
Yeah.
Verstappen's second worst result of the season is worse since Monaco, obviously. Adam, what about you? What do you make of the drivers' standing? Can Lando do it? There was a good question in the press conference. If Lando can do it, do McLaren have to be a bit more selfish and sort of just give him the Verstappen treatment of you're going to win every race if you can?
I think they do. I think realistically speaking, if Lando had won today, I don't think that changes much in terms of what McLaren need to do to make it happen, but it would have been a lot harder to convince Oscar to actually play that role. So I still think it would be hard to convince him to do it, because I think he's got a fair argument to make. Well, look, I'm not doing that much worse than Lando. I won today, and all the other things that's come with it. So it's definitely doable. I'm not going to go as far in saying it's on, because Lando needs to be consistent too. It's all fine and well to say, McLaren have got to sort this out and do this, but Lando's been in positions where he could have won a few more races this season already, and for different reasons he hasn't done that. So let's say if it was prime Max Verstappen from last season dominating in the McLaren right now, I'd say absolutely. He's definitely got a good chance if he keeps this up and doing it. But Lando has to show that consistency. And I know that's asking a lot, and it's also asking for Red Bull, as Lawrence pointed out, the upgrade that they brought this weekend was meant to put them back on top, and it hasn't. If after the Belgian Grand Prix, we get another similar result where McLaren are strong on top, they win, and Max is struggling to fight against Hamilton and maybe even the Ferraris, then it's absolutely in the mix. It's absolutely on. So I don't want to get carried away just yet, but I think a lot of things have to happen for Lando Norris. Some he can control, some he can't, for him to really be in with a shout. But I wouldn't say no with 11 races to go. I don't think it's out of question.
But I would. There's one point to mention, is that the McLaren, the MCL38, is the third least developed car on the grid. It's only had 11 upgrades in the entire year, most of them coming in Miami. Austria was only a front wing upgrade, which has made all the difference, but just one part. And you got Aston Martin, who have put in 29 parts, and they have gotten back to where they were at the start of the season. And even then, you want to talk about team orders? Apparently team orders happened where Alonso let Stroll through to go for Tsunoda, didn't work, Stroll didn't give the place back. So Alonso's going to be fuming. And already it's like, I heard on the radio where they were talking about it, saying, and Fernando was like, I don't want to know. And that was back to the old radio of, I don't want. So there's team radios going on. But in reality, though, is that in terms of it being on, Adam, as you say, I wouldn't say it's on right now. But I would say I'm looking at the button that says on it, and my finger is raising itself off of my chair, as in, like, I'm about to maybe consider pushing the on button, as in, like, but as the races progress and Lando gets closer and closer, my finger is going to be going closer and closer to that button. And if it gets to within 30 points, then it's on.
Which button's going to be pushed first? Is it going to be that button, or is it going to be the Kimi Antonelli button on Toto Wolff's desk?
After the feature race, the pumpernickel intensified.
I would be surprised if that button wasn't already pressed after that.
Well, I mean, Kimi's now 6th place in the championship, and he's running roughshod over Oliver Behrman. I mean, granted, Prema have not really handled this brand new F2 car all that well. They're getting the hang of it. But considering that Kimi's now had a sprint race to his name and a feature race in the space of a couple of weeks, that's going to make people sit up and take notice. And if Kimi can get in the top 3, he's already got the super license points. He's good. But if he gets in the top 3, then, Carlos, with all due respect, I know that you're a really good driver, but Kimi has to be put in the car.
And he's going to be smashing his headphones into that button.
And then George will be like, crikey, all right, Watto, all right, Kimi, let's show you the rips.
Sorry, do you do impressions of the whole Mercedes team, like every staff member?
Oh, well, it's just, it's enough to give you the idea.
Yeah.
It's enough to give you the idea. Well, put George in a World War II sergeant suit, and he'd be really fitting in the role. I mean, to be fair, when he
in the Spitfire, he wouldn't look out of place.
But he is like, "Come on, chaps! All right, come on, chaps! Let's do this." What was
he said a few races ago? He had a very weird. Anyway, this is classic rambling. That seems like a good place to end before we start asking what Russell was saying when. Obviously, one more race to go before the end of the season, before the end of the first half of the season, sort of get the summer break. So in Spa next week. But in the meantime, chaps, huge thanks for joining. And it's been a good episode.
Yes, thanks very much for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
My thanks to Adam and Lawrence once again for joining me today, and my thanks to you as well for listening along. Like I said, we'll be back for the race in Belgium, but in the meantime, you can follow us on socials at PongeringPapaya, and you can also send us an email with your questions, inbox@pongeringpapaya.com. In the meantime, make sure you subscribe on your favourite podcast app, give us a rating, and why not tell your friends about the show as well. We'll see you before Belgium.